There was an Axios article just yesterday saying that they didn't think that that I could win this race because of simply because of my skin color, right? I mean, we have hit and exceeded every benchmark that's been asked of us.
It is an honor this morning to be speaking with the great Wes Moore. He is not only an author, motivational speaker, former military. He's running for governor of the state of Maryland. And the numbers look like, and you're nodding your head. You're nodding your head. So, and you are pleased as punch. So let's give a backstory. I've known Wes Moore for a minute, and his story is so amazing because he was a kid that was counted out, and his great mother kept pushing. He didn't want to read in school, and she found a way. She met him where he was, and she gave him, he loved sports and things like that. So she gave him books on sports to read, and he became a prolific author, prolific speaker, because she met him where he was. And also he now lives in the community. When he was a kid, he was told he couldn't go into because he was a Black man, and a young Black man. And they didn't necessarily have a lot of young Black men coming through the neighborhood unless it was for crime. Okay, that's whatever. But now look at you. I believe you're in your house in that same community. You're in your house in that same community, and you are running for the state's highest seat. How about that?
I'm so happy to be with you always, and I admire you, and I'm thankful for you, and it isn't lost on me at all. The fact that I do live in a community in Baltimore that just that decades ago actually had an ordinance that African Americans and Jewish people could not live in this neighborhood, could not buy property inside this neighborhood. That was on the deed in the neighborhood that I currently live in Baltimore. And it's remarkable because we just see how progress shows itself. And I think about it where you're absolutely right. I was a kid who I moved around a lot when I was young because of tragedy, where I was born in Maryland, actually in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And when I was almost 4 years old, my father died in front of me. And my mother then became a single mom who was going to raise 3 kids on her own. And that was not the life that she prepared for or expected or prayed over. And she had a really difficult time with the transition where, I like to say the reason we call them ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences, is because it's not just ACE. There's never just one. They compound upon each other. Yeah. And so my mother then moved us up to go live in the Bronx, to go live with my grandparents because she needed help. And then, when she got her first job that gave her benefits, first job that gave her reliable hours, first job that allowed her to work one job instead of multiple jobs, that was a job at the NEE Casey Foundation in Baltimore. That was the job. And so when we moved back to Maryland, it was where I had the chance to really to connect in a way. And frankly, I would say that while I wasn't born in Baltimore, this was a place that I finally understood what it meant to call home. And so I'm proud for the fact that I've devoted much of my entire adult life to serve in this city and to be here and to be now the ability to run for governor of my birth state. It's an exciting time.
You weren't born in Baltimore, but you are a part and a product of Baltimore. Baltimore is one of those pictures of pain and hurt. You are a Black man who grew up at a time when you weren't supposed to be in those spaces and places. And now Baltimore is one of those spaces that has been highlighted because of poverty, racism, policing, crime. What is your hope for Baltimore? Because Baltimore's on that spotlight. Baltimore's crime numbers are high. What are you planning to do as governor, if you are elected as governor, to reduce crime in Baltimore, particularly Baltimore, across the state, particularly Baltimore?
Yeah. And and you're so right, April, because this is an issue that I that I take seriously, because, while I plan on being governor for the entire state, we're hitting all 24 jurisdictions, and people are like, y'all are everywhere. And I'm like, get used to it, because that's how I plan on governing. But I also, it's never lost to me the fact that, I am a proud Baltimorean. And Baltimore embraced me in a way that, for so much of my childhood, so much of my life, I had not gotten. So I'm a very proud Baltimorean. And I also know that you cannot have a thriving Maryland if you do not have a growing and a safe Baltimore. And I don't just say that because I'm a Baltimorean. I say that because I'm pretty good at math, right? We are the state's largest city. We are the gateway to this state for so many places from around the country and around the globe. And the number one responsibility of the chief executive is to keep people safe, period. I learned that when I was in the military. I served as a paratrooper. I led soldiers in combat. The number one responsibility that I had was to make sure that my people were safe, right? And that's the number one job of a chief executive. And so when I think about the things that the state can uniquely do inside of this moment to make sure we're addressing public safety, is when you think about things like parole and probation, and the fact that we have a broken parole and probation system, the high chances for a person who is either the victim or the perpetrator of a violent crime to be in violation of parole and probation. That's not the city's responsibility. The mayor's not responsible for that. That's the state. That is the state. That's DPP. Right. And right now it is understaffed and it is underfunded. The state needs to address that. When we're looking at the high propensity of juveniles to be involved inside of crimes, I mean, it's heartbreaking. We're watching how many children are involved in crimes, and particularly, and especially violent crimes. And that is a state function. When you're looking at the Department of Juvenile Services, that's not a local jurisdiction. When you're looking at these violence interruption programs like Safe Streets and Cure and We Are Us, and listen, you're a Baltimorean too, you know this well, you know these programs. They are doing great work. And they're also consistently underfunded by the state, these violence interruption programs. And so we have to make sure that we are working with the community. We have to make sure that we are working with community organizations. We have to make sure that we have policing and a police department that is both going to be, use appropriate intensity and absolute integrity and hold them to that. And we have to make sure that public safety in every way that we define it, in our education systems and housing systems and transportation systems, that is going to be reinforced, because the places that I go where I feel safest is when I look in the eyes of the people around me and I see hope. The places I go where I feel least safe is when I look in the eyes of the people around me and I see hopelessness. Because as my mother used to say, if someone doesn't care about their own future, they don't care about yours either.
I adore your mother. I adore your mother.
She adores you.
Yeah, I'm a mother and I understand what it takes. Now, once you become a mother, you're like, oh, you will do everything and anything you can for your child to succeed. Amen. So, I'm a fan of your mother. I'm more of a fan of your mama than I have been but and I lift you both up so high. So what are the top 5 issues that you're running on? What is your platform for the state of Maryland?
Well, I'm actually I'm clear, because this is a core part of my why. Is we are going to focus on economic opportunities, because if we're not talking about economics, I don't know what we're talking about.
Right.
This all comes back to economics. This is work, it's wages, and it's wealth. We have to create pathways and mechanisms to get to work, wages, and wealth for every Maryland family. Now, that means we are going to make sure that we're focusing on jobs, that making sure we're preparing our students for 21st century jobs, how to prepare our students to not just be employees, but how to be employers, that we have an education system that's moving people from cradle to careers. Right. That means we are going to focus on wages and making sure that we have people who are getting paid fair wages for the work that we're doing. When we looked at how many people lost their jobs due to COVID-19, who were living in poverty before COVID-19, i.e. the working poor, people who are working jobs, in some cases multiple jobs, and still living below the poverty line. And when we talk about wealth, that simply means the ability to own more than you owe, the ability to pass something off to your children besides debt. And the reality is that the state of Maryland right now has an 8-to-1 racial wealth gap. And that's not just hurting people of color. It's not just hurting African Americans. The racial wealth gap in this country, if we could address that, it would add $1.7 trillion into the American GDP. And so all these mechanisms that we're going to focus on, whether it is public safety, whether it is transportation assets that can move people from where they live to where they work, a proper education system. All of these things, all of these are means, because the ends, it's economics. The ends is work, wages, and wealth.
Where are the sectors in Maryland that have a high propensity of renters or less Black homeowners? Because home ownership is the big thing here. And I know Baltimore is a high renters, Baltimore City is a high renters community, even the county. So where are the places in the state that are more renters than there are homeowners?
Well, the thing that we're seeing is that this is something that's taking place all throughout the state. All throughout the state, whether you're talking about over in Allegheny and Garrett or Frederick County, or whether you're talking about Kent County or Somerset or Dorchester or Prince George's County, Calvert County, all throughout the state of Maryland. We have this issue where we have real difficulties in affordable housing, and that's affordable housing for both renters and homeowners. And so when we think about the renters, it does mean we need to do things like preserve the inventory that we have on board. We need to produce new affordable inventory, and we need to protect those who are in these homes, because we're trying to avoid this predatory relationship between landlords and their tenants. But you're absolutely right. We also have to address the issue of home ownership. I was very proud to work with people like Senator Antonio Hayes, who's a state senator in the 40th district in Baltimore, on issues of fair appraisal value in historically redlined neighborhoods, because that has been one of the greatest wealth thefts that we have had in the state of Maryland, has been unfair appraisal values in neighborhoods that historically have been redlined, and where you've had a high propensity of African-American home ownership in those areas, but it's taken wealth away from them, right? So we have to make sure that we're providing incentives and platforms to be able to increase home ownership, because home ownership and just the ability to have equity in something is the fastest way that we are going to address the racial wealth gap and just the wealth gap as a whole that we continue to see within the state.
Yeah, leveraging that home ownership equity into a business or education, et cetera. Right. And that cuts into the wealth gap that we're seeing.
I think about it where it came from a personal level, where when we moved in with my grandparents, my grandmother immigrated to this country. My grandfather was born in the United States, first one in his family, but when he was a toddler, it was the Ku Klux Klan that ran them out, and they moved back to Jamaica. And most of my family always pledged that they would never come back to this country, but my grandfather did. He attended an HBCU and became the first Black minister in the history of the Dutch Reformed Church. And they had a little small home in the Bronx that they bought. And their house is barely big enough for them, but they figured out a way to make it big enough for all of us after my dad died. And that was a chance for them to own a piece of this country. But also when my mom was getting ready, when she wanted to send me away to military school, she didn't have the money to pay for it. And my grandparents helped to pay for it by taking equity out of their home, right? So that investment helped to change my life. And so that's something when we talk about home ownership is not just about a roof over your head, but it does give you the opportunity to create economic mobility that we want to be able to foster and grow.
You sit on a lofty perch. You count some of your friends in your phone and your Rolodex, Oprah Winfrey. But you came from very humble beginnings. You climbed your way up. And I mean, you even tried to help Ben Jealous run when he tried to run for the very seat that you could possibly win. Let's look at the trajectory of your life. Let's look from the beginning to now. What is it for you? Because for me, it's like, wow. I mean, understanding being someone who is Black in America, who did not grow up with a silver spoon in their mouth and had to work for everything, it is mind-blowing. What do you say?
I say that the reality is that the Black experience in this state and in this country, it's an exhausting one. It's been a traumatic one, where you realize that the bar is going to repeatedly get moved for you. I think about this race that we have for governor right now, right? There's not a single campaign that has the momentum that our campaign does. where, we've reached, we have over 5,000 grassroots volunteers on our campaign, eclipsing any other campaign. We've raised more money than any campaign in this field. The campaign that came in second, we've doubled them. And by the way, 73% of our donations are $100 or less. We are building the best grassroots campaign. We received more endorsements by members of the Maryland General Assembly than any campaign in this field. Received the endorsements from, people like County Executive Angela Alsobrooks, who is one of the most, one of the most influential, people within the state. County Executive Stuart Pittman, a former governor, Paris Glendenning, and there was an Axios article just yesterday saying that they didn't think that I could win this race simply because of my skin color, right? I mean, we have hit and exceeded every benchmark that's been asked of us.
And isn't that crazy?
We still have people who are saying that we can't, that because of that, we're not gonna be able to pull this off. And so the way that I approach it, frankly, is I approach it with the way that I've approached everything in my life, where I never lose sight of where I've come from. I come from the legacy and the lineage of Tubman. I come from the legacy and lineage of Douglas. I come from the legacy and lineage of Shabazz. I come from the legacy and lineage of Robeson. I come from the legacy and lineage of Marshall. I come from the legacy and lineage of my grandfather, of my mother. And so I know this, they've never had it easy, none of them. But we're never promised easy, right? But we're promised glory if we keep on fighting and pushing our way through. And that's the way I'm approaching this race, that our job is to continue to make naysayers, knowing that they're always going to be there, and continue to push forward, because our glory and what we're trying to do is not justify them. Our job is to continue pushing forward in the campaign.
I hear Barack Obama in you. I see it, I smell it, I feel it, because I talked to some people during even George W. Bush, then president, said to me he saw overt and subtle racism when Barack Obama was running. And his candidate was John McCain. And I talked to some friends who said, oh, they're well-meaning people, but they would never vote for him because of his skin color. And look at what we had. For 8 years, we had the first Black president. And in 2022, for you to say, an Axios article said that you would never get there because of your skin color. You're there. I know candidates, I know Democratic candidates. My daughter rides with one of the parents who was a Democratic candidate for governor who dropped out because of you. He couldn't catch up. He couldn't catch up. And I think you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, so will your cabinet will your administration be diverse? Are you going to put more emphasis on diversity because of the unique nature of who you are?
We're going to put an emphasis on diversity because that's how I've always been able to win. I'm very clear. We are going to have the most diverse and inclusive administration in the history of our state. We are going to have an administration that actually looks like the state. Our state is so beautifully diverse. I mean, we're talking about a state that is now, according to most recent census numbers, majority people of color, 51%. We have such a beautiful diversity in our state of Maryland. And you know what? Our government is going to reflect that. And when I say it's the only way that I've ever won, I mean that, because if you look at the track record everywhere that I've led, right, where I started a successful small business here in Maryland, and after we had an acquisition, my successor, who I insisted on, my successor, was an African-American woman. And she took the thing to whole new levels after she took over. When I became the CEO of one of the largest poverty fighting organizations in this country, when I first showed up, there were 0 people of color in the C-suite, right? The largest poverty fighting organization in this country, 0 people of color in the C-suite. By the time I left, over 50% people of color, by the way, 70% women. So it's the way that I've always led. And so that's the pledge that I have, is that when you look at our administration, not only is it going to be the most competent, not only is it going to be the most hard driving, not only is it going to be the most focused, it's also going to be the most diverse, because that as a state is how we're going to win.
Anything else you'd like to add?
But the thing I do want people to know is, when I joined the military, I first joined the military when I was 17 years old. I literally wasn't even old enough to sign the paperwork. My mother had to sign the paperwork for me. And my mother, I mean, after my teenage years, she was more than happy to sign whatever paperwork that she had to sign to send me off. But we learned something in our first days. And it was a motto that they asked us to live by. And the motto was this: leave nobody behind, ever.
Sorry.
If you get one of my people, I will send a battalion in to go get them if I have to. We do not leave people behind. And I want that to be the motto for the state of Maryland. For us to be a state where we don't leave people behind, because we're going to grow, and I will insist that we grow, but we're going to grow equitably. And we're going to build, and I will insist that we build, but we are going to build collectively. We're not going to leave people behind because we don't have to.